Well, fall camp for Oregon football starts tomorrow, but recruiting never really stops, does it? What's the latest news? What are we looking at? The latest commitment or lack thereof? Like, what is going on the recruiting trail? We'll find out today with our recruiting expert. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster and lifelong Oregon Ducks fan. Thank you for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, wherever you're listening to or watching the show. 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts help with the show as well. Thank you to everybody out there who has already done so. And this guy joining me today has probably heard that spiel enough to where he could recite it if I asked him to. The director of recruiting for Sports Illustrated and our expert here at the Locked On Network, John Garcia Jr. John, welcome back to Locked On Ducks.
Good to be back on with you, Spencer. Looking good, man. It's a nice polo for you. Well, you probably were golfing earlier, I would imagine.
As we record this, I had an early morning. I was doing a radio hit in the Oklahoma area, actually, in Tulsa, talking about Pac-12 realignment. And so I threw on the shirt, and I was like, you know what? It's 7 in the morning. I'm up and at 'em. Let's go hit the driving range and then come back and get some work done. That's how we're rolling. And
Love it.
recruiting is a job that is always rolling, right? It doesn't really stop. Even during the dead period, you can still, talk to kids and figure out, watch film and figure out where your positional needs are, all that sort of stuff. But I saw some comments from a very animated Oklahoma head coach, speaking of the Sooner State, in Brent Venables, and he was at the podium talking about kind of the value or perhaps lack thereof sometimes of verbal commitments, which pertains to a particular Oregon recruit in a moment. But he was pretty ticked off, John. And I mean, he's looking at it from a head coach's perspective, which he is now. He's been the DC at Clemson for, I think, the last 36 years or so, something like that. And
Give or take.
now he's finally got a head gig back where he was a DC before. And he's just feeling frustrated, it seems, in this quote where he's saying, like, yeah, these guys are committing to me, but then they're going to take a visit here. They're going to take a visit there. They're doing that. What do you make of that dynamic overall, and also how Brent Venables feels about it? I personally empathize with him. I'd get a little annoyed with it if I were a head coach.
It's annoying, but it's part of the process. I think, he comes from Clemson, like you mentioned, where they just handle kind of everything differently. They don't offer at the same rate. They don't host kids at the same rate as other programs. And when you commit to Clemson under Dabo Swinney, you are not allowed to take other visits. So in turn, over the last few years, what have we seen? Clemson commits who want to take other visits, so they decommit because they want to go see some other schools. And that is the nature of college football recruiting. A verbal commitment is what it says it is. It is just a promise of me saying, hey, Spencer, I really like your podcast and I want to join your podcast. Nothing else. There are no written anything, contracts, scholarships, signatures, none of that. It is just a verbal commitment to a head coach for that recruiting cycle. And this recruiting cycle is going to begin to end in December. So we're still 4+ months away from that early signing period. February, of course, the traditional one. So in between now and then, there are going to be decommitments and there are going to be flips and there are going to be kids who are committed to one school and change their mind. So to say that it's frustrating is an understatement, but to also try to develop a solution to where you can truly combat it, I think would be almost naive. But coming from Clemson, I could see where that is a little bit more idealistic, right? It's a romanticized version of courtship. It is you are courted, you make this decision mentally, you audibly confirm said decision, and then you get married at the end, which would be signing day. There is no dating others. There is no bachelor party. There is nothing else in between, of your promise and the actual execution of said promise. But again, it's 2022. NIL is a thing. Player mobility is a thing. The transfer portal is a thing. these kids see it as normal and as successful. Joe Burrow. I mean, my goodness, there's 100 quarterbacks and players I could list that had a change of heart either in high school or in college or both at times, and it kind of just worked out. And there's many more cases to where it hasn't quite worked out, but that path is it's no longer viewed as red flaggish, if that makes sense. Kids who decommit, kids who change high schools, kids who, any of that stuff used to be like, oh, we don't want that kid. Not the case anymore. Some of the best players in the country go through that once, twice, or even more. So I think it's a little idealistic of Brent, and I get it. All things even, yeah, of course you want your commits to be done, but it's 2022. You have to recruit your commits and everyone else. It just is what it is. And that's why a lot of coaches don't want to deal with recruiting, because it's 12 months a year and it's not even done when kids, may say that it's done. But again, they're kids, and there's value out there. And if they want to test that value, they have every right to, and they will continue to do so. So the Brent Venables, the Dabo Sweeneys of the world, to me, will be few and farther in between, because it's just not reflective of where player empowerment and the business end of recruiting has gone.
I think the other factor playing in there to why he specifically feels that way, and though I don't know if he's vocalized it, I'd imagine Nick Saban might be in the same camp. But then again, kids probably don't decommit, or at least big time recruits probably don't decommit from Alabama the way they might at other schools. But Brent Venables has been around the block a little bit. He's of that, at least an older generation. Maybe not Nick Saban. I don't know how old he is off the top of my head. He's not as old as Saban, but he's certainly of that age, and it's a little bit of an old school mentality. I think that's why I empathize with him, because I'm a little bit old school in that way, and that when I say that I'm going to do something or that I'm going to be somewhere, I tend to want to do that. When I tell my play-by-play employer, Southern Utah University, yeah, I'm coming back for the 2022-23 sports season, I'm going to do that. And if another school were to contact me and say, "Hey, we're interested in you for this," I'd say, "Well, that's great and all, but I told them like I was going to be here." And so that's just how I think about it. But I see what you're saying, that it's a reality of college football. But on that note, Jurrion Dickey is understandably getting some attention here. And we talked a couple months ago, John, about how, yeah, we won't be surprised if he's reclassified as a 5-star. He's going up as a recruit at the wide receiver position. He is a really, really good looking wide receiver prospect, an NFL sort of body, frankly. He's big, he's fast, he's agile, big hands. He's got everything that you want there. Oregon's got his verbal commitment right now, but other schools are kind of poking their heads out the door, being like, what's going on there, Jurrion? You wanna come on down and hang for a little bit?" So, what are you hearing on that front?
Well, surely Miami is the school that most people are curious about relative to Dickey, and why not, right? This is a program that their head coach has recruited Jurrion before, right? He was an Oregon target for well over a year, maybe 2 years, dating back to Mario Cristobal's time up in Eugene. And there's obviously multiple assistant coaches that followed Mario from Oregon to Miami. So yeah, Dickey is a legitimately high level target for the Hurricanes, both before he committed to Oregon and continuously after. I mean, it just is the nature of college football recruiting, and Dickey has reciprocated it on his end. He has taken multiple trips to Miami. He's a big fisherman, so he certainly wanted to test the waters out there, and maybe compare and contrast to that in Northern California and the Pacific Northwest. But this is now the second time that he's done it, and he said it's just for family, and he's saying all the right things. But the visits and the actions speak a little bit louder. And then furthermore, he's real tight with Jaden Rashada. I think that is something that is well known at this point. They've played 7-on-7 together. Last time you and I saw Jurrion, he was playing for the Miami Immortals, which has like 4 or 5 Miami commitments and counting on that roster, with head coaches and assistant coaches on that roster who are Miami fans, right? So it's a Miami-based team, so understandably so in that regard. So I think there's been a lot of internal momentum for Miami with Dickey. Now, is it tangible? Are there predictions where he's going to flip? Probably not. But I think you look at Dickey's standpoint, and he's he's visiting Miami, and he is continuously on social media talking about Oregon and Junior Adams and the wide receiver group that has been put together, and pairing with Dante Moore, which was huge in any case to keep him. Pairing, his game with Dante's, I think is a really big part of that. And of course, Dante committed like 2 months after Jurrion did. So naturally, it's not something that was built into that initial Oregon commitment. But I will also say on the pro Oregon side of this thing, Jurrion's been a duck lean, I would say, for a year. So it has transcended coaching staffs. There are elements of Eugene in and of itself that he really enjoys, and then you combine that with the new coaching staff. He's a big fan of Kenny Dillingham. He'll shout out Junior Adams, I don't know, every day on social media. So that stuff is obviously important to him as well. So it is something to keep an eye on. There's no doubt Miami's recruiting at a high level, just like Oregon is. And there's obviously ties to that part of the country, and some friends along with it. So if he continues to take the visits, I would obviously be a little bit more cautious in that expectation of Dickey being a duck, which is a phrase I didn't think I would say today. But certainly, he's worth it. Like you said, he's arguably a top 2, 3, 4, 5 receiver in this class that is known for having a lot of great receivers. It's a receiver heavy group, and he's one of the best, 100%. So whether it's Miami or whoever else, you expect him to continue to be recruited by others, and that should be expected going forward as well.
Well, there's more to get to on the recruiting front with John Garcia of Sports Illustrated, but there's even more to get to with Built Bar. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you're depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. Guess what? There's a new flavor. Ready? Delicious, indulgent cookie dough. I've got some in my pantry right now. They've got little clumps of cookie dough in them, covered in 100% real chocolate. Built has done it again. All the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's healthy for you. Only 160 calories and a whopping 15 grams of protein. They keep me going on the golf course. They'd keep Jurrion Dickey going out there while he's fishing for sure. You can get yours right now. If you go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your next order. That is promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. I imagine, John, that one way Oregon can stand out, Jurrion Dickey's a big fisher. Like, I was joking about it with the ad read a moment ago, but I'm sure there's some places to fish in Florida, but I guarantee you it's not as nice as a good summer in Oregon and the rivers and forests that you get up there. You just don't get that sort of action down there in Florida. Like, if you want to be a fly fisherman, I mean, Eugene is like a 90-minute drive or so from Bend. That's like some of the best fly fishing in the country. Not to mention the fact that Bend is a wonderful place. I'm not a fisherman myself, as all of you know out there, Duck fans. I'm a big time golfer. There's that in Bend too, but I want to ask you stuff like that for recruits, right? Jurrion Dickey loves fishing, and look, if I loved golf and I were a football player, yeah, maybe I would consider the sort of golf I'd be able to play. How much can that factor into a guy choosing where he plays college football?
Look, I think when you talk about the on-field stuff, it speaks for itself. But yeah, a lot of these kids will tell you that you take visits for almost no elements of football. You want to see how you feel about the atmosphere, how you feel about the campus, the housing, the food. Any one of these elements have been lifted up to talk, and being talked about by high level recruits as part of the reason why they've made decisions. It's the reason why every facility, it feels like, in the country is always under renovations. Like, oh, well, now the new waterfall is being put in, and it's got a slide, and it takes you to a chamber where you can sleep for 20 minutes, but it really means you slept for 7 hours. I don't know. There's a reason that the arms race in college football, it's not renovating stadiums. It's weight rooms, it's dorms, it's the facilities that these players all but live in while they're there. So if you expand that to the cities and the towns and the states that these schools are located in, yeah, that becomes pretty important if this is something that is important to you. And I was scrolling Jurrion's timeline while you were reading that fabulous promo that you did, and he caught a shark in Miami the other day. He said the sucker was heavy. I'm like, what? So you're not an amateur if you're catching sharks in any body of water. So yes, if you guys want to see a picture of Jurrion Dickey with a shark, you can get a
I
sense of
might
how
have to
big
look
he
that
is
up.
because the shark doesn't look very big in the photo. But yeah, I would say this is more than a hobby for Jurrion Dickey. So yeah, that stuff can become really important. This is the second time he's visited Miami. The first time he talked about fishing, and now he's showing us after the second time about all the other fishing. And now Oregon fans are combating that with their photos of fishing local to to the state
Yes.
of Oregon. So it's quite outside the box, but yeah, it's really important. I do think that everything around the campus could help lock it in, because when you have so many great options, a lot of them feel the same when it comes to X's and O's, right? Everybody's telling Jurrion Dickey, you're going to be our number one receiver. We're going to use you in the boundary, in the red zone. You're going to rack up double-digit touchdowns, blah, blah, blah. So when it comes to blurring that line, it's very easy to do so, but you really can't do that with the other elements of campuses, and Miami's obviously unique in and of itself, but so is Eugene. As a person who's been to both, I mean, those are two of the most unique places in America if you really have to come down to it, in different ways, obviously, but very much not like other things that you experience. So I think that's an interesting, element of this whole thing, because you're living there. You're there at least 3 years. Your family's visiting you there. It's not just about football for these kids. It's largely about football, but again, when there are clear other hobbies, like we talk about Mateo Uyangalele, the music producer,
Yep.
you don't think he's going into these studios and saying, this studio sucks? So, when he gets back to his family, this one sucks. This one's really good. That is absolutely going to matter to him. So why wouldn't we equate the educational differences that are important to him with the kind of just human, experience, things that are priorities to Jurrion Dickey, or hobbies or activities that can maybe one day become another career. I don't know how serious it is, but it feels pretty serious because it's come up as much as his game has, and he's one of the best players in America. So have at it what you will.
I think this is slowly turning into a fishing podcast.
I
Just
don't know
just
anything about fishing. Let me just make that
Me neither.
clear.
I'd have to get my dad or one of my good friends on here. They both know how to fish, and both are from. My dad grew up in Medford, and my friend is from the Portland area originally. Lives in Bend now, and goes fishing all the time. I am not, like I said, everywhere I go, I go. But you can fish a lot of the places you go too, and it's honestly such a great hobby. I promise we're going to stop talking about fishing and get back to recruiting here right after I just bring up that I think that if I had a son and I was going through a list of hobbies that were options for him, I would love it if my son loved to fish. I'd be like, you know what? That's a great hobby. I think that is a fantastic. There are a lot worse hobbies you can have, and I think
Great point.
we'll leave it at that. So let's keep going here down so the list of some names that Oregon is looking at in the class of 2023. A couple guys in the trenches, which is where I feel like a lot of the recruiting focus is going to be for Oregon in the coming months, because there haven't been a lot of names there. There's Tavita Pomee, the big bodied 3-star guy out of the state of Utah on the defensive line, but no offensive linemen just yet. And they've been in on a couple guys, but haven't gotten there. Connerly, of course, in the class of 2022 will be a foundational piece, but they're going to need to add to more guys to that position. I think that's a pretty understood consensus. One name who's popped up on the recruiting radar is 4-star offensive lineman Caleb Lomu. So, what can you tell me about him? Kind of the sort of player he is, and where Oregon's at with him.
Yeah, Caleb's a taller, leaner offensive tackle prospect who is just now, I would say, at the forefront of his ascent. He was at Oregon over the weekend for the Saturday Night Lights event, which is always a big deal in town. So good to see the new staff carrying that over, much like we see at some other programs that have continued kind of long-standing off-season traditions there. So yeah, he took a visit out there, and he was so good he didn't have to camp for his offer. So that's how much Oregon is coveting him along the offensive line. Didn't camp, still got the scholarship offer, and he's picked up a few more offers here recently. I think Florida offered him on the 31st of July. So yeah, he's increasing his options there. Has only taken a couple official visits. He's got some room to take some more during the season. So if he wants to further vet some of the new options that are in on him, he can do so during the season in September. But if he doesn't, it's probably good news for the Ducks because it's dead period right now. There are no other visits to be taken at this point. And he obviously spent his last available visit window up in Eugene overnight. So I do think that's good news there. Like you said, huge need for the Ducks in that regard. No O lineman on board just yet. But this is to me a long-term guy. He's 250, 260 right now, so extremely long and lean at the tackle position. But you understand why he's picking up more offers. He moves pretty well. That length simply cannot be coached, and a lot of coaching staffs around the country are beginning to recognize it. So I think the ball is totally in Cam's court, depending on how long he wants to elongate it. He could, if he comes off the board right now, I'd probably think Oregon's in really good shape. And if not, then I think he takes a couple more official visits and goes from there. But yeah, otherwise it's your Utahs, your Pac-12 programs that are involved in this recruitment to this point. But again, continuing to take visits, I think, is a good sign for Oregon in this regard because he hadn't taken that Oregon official. I'm not sure if he'd even been to Eugene in the past very much. So I think that's important as well. And you couple that with the fact that it's a new coaching staff, so naturally that's always important to get that face time with those guys.
Defensive line, another position we're watching closely here on the recruiting trail. I've said for a while, I think that's where I'm hoping Lanning and Lupoi with their pedigree and resumes, not just as defensive coaches but as defensive recruiters, it can really make a splash and continue kind of what we've seen over the last several years, getting players like Kayvon Thibodeau, Brandon Dorless coming in who have just been really really good players to high level NFL draft picks, of course, in Thibodeau on the defensive line. Amari Washington is a name to follow, four-star defensive tackle. The Ducks miss out on Colton Vasek, who Vasek or Vasek, I think it's Vasek, commits to Oklahoma. Oregon was squarely in the mix there, but we get Tyler Turner, they get Colton Vasek. Seems like that happens a lot. You have like two or four guys that are down to two schools, and two will go here and two will go here, one here and one there. So Vasek goes to Oklahoma. Now attention's kind of turned for Oregon to Amari Washington.
Yeah, a little bit more of an inside-out guy compared to Vasek, who to me was a pure edge rusher. So maybe more positional value with Amari Washington. And sure enough, as you just set it up perfectly, my friend, Oregon and Oklahoma in the final group for Amari Washington, LSU, and I think the Florida Gators are also involved there. And look, Florida is chasing Oregon on a few different targets here that we've talked about here in the trenches lately. Something interesting maybe to track down the line. But yeah, Washington has expanded his list of top schools to now include the Gators, but Oregon was in here from the jump. And I think that was important here because he's been able to get up to campus. He was another visitor for Saturday Night Lights. He's a kid out of Arizona, so naturally a little bit easier to get to campus compared to some others that we've talked about over the last few weeks and months. So yeah, I don't know what this timeline is, though. I think that's what's interesting. He is down to only a few schools at this point, so history tells us that he's probably closer to making a decision than not. But throwing another school in that top three, which was the original grouping, makes it interesting. And he did that just before the month turned over to August. So adding Florida there, I'm wondering if a visit is being set up or something enough to pique his interest is becoming a part of that conversation because he's only taken a couple officials. Florida was not one of them. So I think that will be interesting to track here going forward. But coming off of SNL, I do think there is confidence up in Eugene that Washington, should he commit sooner rather than later, would stay in Pac-12 country and be a Duck at the end of the day because they're the only Pac-12 schools still in it.
Always good talking with John Garcia Jr. of Sports Illustrated. Of course, I was not going to leave a recruiting show without talking about Oregon's most recent commitment that did come along the defensive line in Terence Greene. He announced that on, was it Monday? I believe, yeah, Monday, the 1st of August. We've talked about him a little bit here on the show, but everything was trending towards Oregon. He ends up choosing the Ducks and kind of an inside-out player. We've discussed him before, but maybe not everybody's seen. Just kind of your quick rundown there on the sort of player the Ducks are adding here on the defensive line.
Yeah, fitting that a guy named Green is going to play for the Ducks. I know it's not the
Yeah.
first time, but we're journalists, so we have to have fun with that stuff. Yeah, this is a long athletic prospect. Got some two-way ability, which is good. I love players who play kind of the counter position to their projection. So he's a defensive end, plays a little bit of tight end, so you get a little bit of that counter, perception, and it helps your football IQ, and oftentimes it helps your readiness to jump to the next level because you just have different gains when you focus on one spot. But on defense, Terrence shows a lot of juice off the edge. He's got great length to his name, so he can build counter moves to pair with that speed rush that works so well at the high school level. So I think the foundation is really strong here, but he's got this great big frame, almost basketball player like, where you could just see more weight being added. So you wonder where the true position projection may end up for a school like Oregon with him. I think he's more comfortable on the outside, but I think he could kind of work his way inside just depending on how much his frame can actually carry. And that's a good problem to have because maybe early in his career, he's a pure pass rusher, and then he develops into this kind of all around inside out threat that every defensive coordinator wants on their roster. But like you said, big to get Green in the fold. You need trenchmen in this class. Everything else is looking pretty good. You need trench prospects on both sides of the ball. So a little bit more pass rusher help on top of that is never a bad thing in this day and age.
Well, hopefully the first of many defensive line commitments for the Ducks, and we, of course, would like them to be noteworthy names as well. And John Garcia Jr. is a noteworthy name because we're always talking recruiting when he comes on, the director of that area for Sports Illustrated and an expert here at the Locked On Network. John, appreciate the time as always.
Always a pleasure, boss. Thanks for having me back on.
I appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.